Do you ever get that feeling where you know something's about to happen before it does? And no, I'm not talking about that awful Nicolas Cage movie Next. Before Good Boy was released, its lead performer, Indy the Dog, penned a letter to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences decrying the fact that animals have never received an award for Best Actor for their output, stating that animal actors have carried emotional arcs, and in some cases entire franchises, all while suffering this indifference and disregard from the two-legged actor community at large. And it's a valid point. Cinema has overlooked animals' contributions for decades and regularly treats them as cheap, emotive, and disposable commodities. It's concerning how often this happens, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's pervasive and unsettling, but something about this letter didn't sit right with me. Constant references to yanking my leash and throwing a bone, to lifting your leg, or asking if he isn't a good enough boy for them, left me feeling weirdly uneasy. It felt so fake and forced. This letter wasn't aimed at the Academy, it was aimed at the internet at large. Specifically, people that refer to their animals as fur babies and those who call themselves dog daddies. Yes, you know the type. And yes, I'm very much a dog daddy. To me, this letter was less an open plea to give animals more recognition and more a cynical attempt to get more eyes on a weak horror film with one redeeming factor. After all, we know Indy didn't write the letter, given that he's, a dog. So who did? Simple, of course, the independent film company, the same people who distributed this movie. And it worked, as I speculated it would. The letter achieved its purpose, with social media ablaze talking about how he deserves an Oscar and how his performance was one for the ages, despite the movie having only just come out. It was a case of agreement by assimilation, of cynical marketing agency personnel brainstorming in a boardroom thinking, how do we get more eyeballs on this film? And then brazenly crafting this letter, knowing the internet would pick up the ball and run with it, championing a cause they hadn't given a single thought to previously, with fervorous zeal and full-throated support. At the 9th annual Astra Film Awards, Indy won the award for Best Performance in a Horror Thriller, beating out Ethan Hawke, Sally Hawkins, Sophie Thatcher, and newcomer Alfie Williams. In one of the greatest years for horror, from Weapons to Bring Her Back to Companion to Sinners, with some of the best performances ever committed to film, Indy won. And it wasn't a fluke. The letter had achieved its purpose, with social media propelling this talking point into the cultural zeitgeist, with dog lovers the world over talking about how he deserves it because he's such a good boy, etc., etc. Let me clarify something at this point before you start singling me out and branding me a hater. I'm a certified dogaholic with a deep, deep love for dogs and animals in general. In fact, I prefer them to people, but don't tell anyone. However, I also have a deep love for the creative arts and for artistic integrity. That a dog could beat out some of these performances suggests what we've known for a long time. That these types of award ceremonies aren't based on talent, and this isn't a meritocracy. When Leo DiCaprio, arguably the best actor of our generation, can be snubbed over and over again until he has to literally eat worms and maggots to finally get his dues, something is seriously amiss. And I think when you're putting dogs, animals that don't know what a movie is, don't know they're in a movie, and have no idea they're on camera accepting an award on the same level as humans from a talent, skill, and competency perspective, we've hit rock bottom as a species. Sally Hawkins genuinely gave one of the best acting performances of all time in Bring Her Back, a performance to rival Brando's in On the Waterfront, and no, I'm not being facetious here. Seriously, it needs to be seen to be believed. I've never seen such a quietly understated, sinister, and devastatingly emotional performance contrasting between icy cold indifference to manic, unhinged chaos. It's what acting is all about, and is especially incredible when you realise that Hawkins was previously far more known for her lovey-dovey, quintessentially English performances defined by poise and decorum before this movie came out. This was her big moment. It was a tonal shift delivered with a gravitas that deserves to be recognised decades from now as one of the great performances, not just for a horror film, but for cinema in general. And this could have been a watershed moment for horror heads, with horror finally getting its roses as a serious genre at the awards, but instead they gave it to a dog, reinforcing that this is not a serious genre and likely setting it back even further amidst the old farts who gatekeep the awards. It's not to say horror hasn't had its dues at all. At time of writing, Sinners received a record-breaking 16 Oscar nominations, but it remains to be seen how it'll do overall. The Substance getting 5 Oscar nominations in 2024 was a pivotal moment for body horror obsessives like myself, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. It only won Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and I'm certain that if it wasn't covering the topics it was, the objectification of the female form in the industry and the impact of aging disproportionately affecting women in casting substantially more than men, then I doubt it'd get the accolades it did, much like Sinners exploring bigger themes and issues than vampires during the Prohibition era. In recent years, Hollywood and the Academy Awards have been desperately trying to get down with the kids, basically since the Oscars So White hashtag trended in what feels like another lifetime at this point. They're persistently behind the curve, an old man's club if you will, and always have been. And until they begin integrating younger voices and visionaries, it'll remain this way for the foreseeable, but that's a topic for another video. By most accounts, the film took over 3 years to develop, precisely because there was no real acting involved. Anyone can place a dog in a dark house with a close-up lens on them and film them till they get the results that they like if they have the time, effort and inclination to do so. You can talk all day about training animals and getting the perfect shot, but ultimately you're just putting a camera on your dog and waiting till you get the right reaction, hence the extremely lengthy shooting process, with even the director, Ben Leonberg, admitting a lot of the work was done in post and that Indy didn't need to learn new tricks for the movie. Now, does that mean this wasn't an accomplishment? Absolutely not. Indy carried the movie, but there's been countless great animal performances over the years as good as, if not better than Indy's. From my man Hooch, the canine, even to the immortal Beethoven, animals have been delivering great performances for decades, and I think if you're going to give any animal an award, then it should have been Clyde from Every Which Way But Loose. Real ones know exactly what I'm talking about. There have been better performances, and there have been better movies. When I first read about Good Boy, it seemed like exactly my type of jam. Dogs and zombies. What can go wrong? But whereas I envisaged something akin to the dog scene in the Dawn of the Dead remake, a dog running between buildings, escaping the vast hordes of the undead, what I got was the polar opposite. An introspective, allegorical think piece with clumsy, ham-fisted themes and a premise more obvious than the twist in the game. Sorry Michael, you know I love you really. It simply wasn't a good movie, and it was painfully apparent throughout that it had no budget. But this shouldn't be an excuse. The entire way through, I couldn't stop thinking about 2008 movie Colin. A movie set from a zombie's perspective that was acted out by film study students that famously had a budget of 45 scoops. Mostly used to buy biscuits and a crowbar. And no, I'm not making that up. But though Colin had its issues, it still brought more interesting ideas to the forefront than Good Boy ever could. Because ultimately, if you have the creative vision, passion, and can write to a reasonable standard, you can make a lot of concepts work. Horror is famous for its low budgets, and all-time classics like Halloween, Saw, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre are largely set in small locations, meaning it shouldn't be used to buttress why this movie offered so much and delivered so little. If you listen to the media, however, you might have come away with a different perspective. Insane hyperbole, like IndieWire calling Indy the Dog one of the most emotive actors of his generation, or Paste magazine calling it one of the year's most potently unnerving and emotionally resonant horror films, means I have to ask, did the space-time continuum shift in 2016, and are we living in some other version of reality? Or should I just get a one-way ticket to Mars already? Actually, no. Scratch that. We've already talked about the absurdity of comparing a dog actor to a human one, but have these reviewers just not watched a lot of horror movies? Good Boy was tame, timid, pedestrian, and only vaguely ominous. At no point was I remotely unnerved or unsettled, and yes, that's likely because I'm dead inside, but it was the same run-of-the-mill schlock we saw in the late 90s and early 2000s in terms of sanitisation, except a little more highbrow, and horror has moved on. Movies like Friday the 13th and Halloween are passé, even quaint by today's standards, despite being game changers at their time of release, and they're still far scarier than Good Boy. I don't think this movie would have been made if it wasn't for Indy the Dog, which might seem obvious given the entire premise hinges on him, but one single factor can't make an entire movie, and barebone stories don't cut it anymore, especially with how accessible filmmaking has become. Anyone dissenting from the status quo in this movie is considered a pariah, at least as far as social media comments go. And there's no doubt I'll face backlash for covering this, but it has to be said, and I make no apologies for saying it. I've seen even the mildest of criticisms be greeted with sheer vitriol, that the person doesn't have the emotional depth to understand it, that the concept must have gone over their head, or that they're a deeply unhappy and miserable person. And to the latter I'd say, hey, guilty as charged. But this type of commentary is always a bit silly to me. This isn't exactly a razorhead in terms of abstract surrealism, and I've always loathed the "you didn't understand it" argument, as art is subjective and your takeaways aren't invalidated just because you come out with a different conclusion than the accepted expectations. Good Boy should never have won an award aimed at acting professionals, and it does a disservice to the entire medium. It also has bigger ramifications. We're seeing the first wave of AI slowly seep into films ahead of the flood dam inevitably collapsing over the next decade, and giving an acting award to a dog, in my opinion, is tantamount to saying that the skill and artistry of acting doesn't matter, and that these actors are replaceable and expendable. After all, if we can give an award to a dog above actual humans, then who's to say down the line that we won't do the same with digital actors created by studios to sidestep the wages and respect being sought by actual professionals? It's only a matter of time, and this is the opening salvo. You might think I'm being melodramatic, but we're already seeing graphic designers being replaced on films like Late Night with the Devil, and entire series are being made with AI slop, such as On This Day, 1776, a series made by someone who should know better, Darren Aronofsky. That such a visionary filmmaker can embrace this is a worrying and telling sign of where we're headed. Studios are always looking to cut corners, and it starts with a crew and works its way up. They'll take their time, slowly manufacturing consent and undermining the acting profession with decisions like this, turning the tables and giving audiences the ability to choose whichever likeness has been sold off by their states to supplant lead actors. It's a slippery slope, and unfortunately one that's inevitable, and those championing Indy the Dog over his human counterparts are part of the problem. I don't begrudge Indy winning an award, but it shouldn't have been best performance in a horror or thriller. Other award ceremonies like the Austin Film Critics Association and the Boston Society of Film Critics dedicated special awards to him, and I've no issue with that, but put yourself in the actor's shoes, sitting in a glitzy award ceremony surrounded by the titans of your industry, only to be pipped to the post by a dog. I'd be mortified, as I'm sure you would too, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. This is not a critique of the goodest boys, but rather a critique of the cynical distributors and the Hollywood Creative Alliance who prioritise social media engagement above artistic integrity.